Today's webinar workshop is on optimizing production efficiencies, and we're going to be going over 5 key tips in order to do that. Today's hosts include Rob McCoy.
Hello, everyone.
Rob McCoy, can you tell everybody a little bit about your background?
Sure. So before I worked at Holganix, I started off as a lawn care technician 20 some years ago and moved through the different positions within a lawn care company and finishing at a point where I owned my own lawn care company and sold that. So I have a lot of different experience also in communicating with all of our customers throughout the United States and love trying to help our current customers build their business and try to become more profitable in any way that we can. So that's what I'm looking forward to today.
Cool. We also have Chris Knapp and Brian Marr, also from Holganix. They're our territory representatives. Many of them you guys may already know them. Chris and Brian, can you guys say hello?
Hello, everybody.
Thanks so much for joining us. All right.
And Chris,
can you guys hear me? I'm sorry, I was having some problems here.
No, we
This
got
is
Brian.
All right.
All right, so today, as Katie mentioned, we're going to go over 5 topics. The overview of those topics are technician training, an inventory system, application method, vehicle inventory, and maintenance schedule. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we can become more efficient and profitable within the production model of lawn care. We were really trying to narrow this down and looking at 2 things. Where can we increase profitability the most? And what are the easiest things to implement? So that's why we are focusing on these topics.
And one matter of housekeeping before we get started. I see that there's some questions that are already funneling in. That is awesome. Hang on to them. We're going to be answering all of the questions at the end of the webinar.
All right. So for any of you that were on last week's webinar, you probably saw this quote, but good fortune is what happens when opportunity meets with planning. That's by Thomas Edison. And really, no matter which topic of webinar we're doing, taking the time to focus on the planning will hopefully create some better opportunities for you down the road. So let's get rolling. So the first topic, technician training. This is possibly the most important topic, and we're just starting off with it right away. Now, one of the things I've noticed in a lot of different companies that we've gone to is the better the technicians, the better the business. And all of those companies that have great technicians focus on some type of system for doing their training, whether it is monthly training, weekly training. They even if it's just scheduled meetings and they have a chance to elaborate on their experience throughout the week. All of those things matter. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is develop a predetermined list of topics. So rather than go in kind of emergency mode as to what's needed, think about for the entire season, what are all the things that at the end of the year, if you have a perfect technician, what would they have to be trained on? So list out those topics and then attack those. That doesn't mean that you can't throw in an emergency topic, but you definitely want to make sure that you are covering all your bases because you can get lost in the trenches as the year goes along and be focused on certain things that don't have as much impact. Some examples of training points are calibration, how to estimate the lawns so that when they're out there, they can still be selling at a proper price. Identifying lawn problems. I mean, you could do identifying lawn problems every week for the entire season and never run out of material, just because the season's going to constantly give us new issues and new things to pay attention to. When you're doing the technician training, make sure that you are focused on the different styles of learning that the technicians are going to be more prone to benefit from. So you want to make sure that you have hands-on training, that you incorporate videos, that you have actual instructions that they can hold and take with them. And one of my favorite things is using a technician spotlight. So typically, all this training falls on the production manager when it comes to preparing it. But if you use a technician spotlight and you already have your predetermined topics, you can assign those topics to different technicians where you think that they already excel at that particular subject, and get them to prepare the presentation, let them know what your expectations are, and then have them become the teacher for that week. That's worked really well, not just for the people that are learning it, but it tends to make the person who is the technician in the spotlight own it a little bit more and pay attention to everyone else a little bit more, and really become more of a leader when it comes to that specific topic.
Hey, real quick, can the audience note in the chat box whether or not you guys are having a hard time hearing Rob?
And I'm still talking now just to make sure.
So it looks like we're having no issues for most of you, and it's just one of our attendees that's having problems. I'll address it separately. Sorry to interrupt, guys. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a system-wide problem.
And if you are having an issue, as always, we record the webinars and publish them later as well. So if you're having a problem now, you may not have a problem later on when you get to check the recording. So on technician training, back to what we were talking about. The weekly repetition, I had mentioned a couple of different time frames that I've seen different companies use, but the weekly repetition in a quick format has seemed to work the best, because it just makes the technicians focus on what's important. It doesn't occupy a lot of time, because typically when it's a monthly meeting, it goes an hour, hour and a half, whereas you have a weekly meeting and it may be 10, 15 minutes. And that covers the numbers, the expectations, but also the training topic each time. So when you cover that training topic, also make sure that you highlight it throughout the week. And when you want to make sure that you also follow up on what the previous topic was for the previous week, and make sure that you highlight someone that did a great job with that. So that they realize that you were paying attention to it and that it's being followed up on. So that's a really easy thing to implement. It's just a matter of scheduling it and preparing for it. But the preparation is really not that hard, because it's not like you're doing a long seminar or something like that. You need 5 minutes worth of material. You need 5 minutes of discussion so that everybody understands what the expectations are, and then you're on to the rest of your meeting. So some of the benefits that you'll see from doing technician training: reduction in service calls, increased referrals if you have a sales focus on it, but also increased referrals just because your overall result out on the lawns is going to be better. And then increased upsells. Typically, the best people in the company for doing upsells are the technicians, because they know exactly what state the lawn is in, what conditions you're dealing with, and the homeowner is much more prone to listening to them with their, knowing that their eyes have been on their lawn and they have already had some interaction with them. So that's basically it on the technician training. But I want to bring in Brian and Chris just to hear if other experiences that they had working with companies, any specific tips or tricks that they can think of when it comes to how technicians have been trained, or anything like that.
This is Chris.
One of the things that I was thinking about was, I have a large customer in Little Rock that we've done a lot of training with them, and having the different style of training modules, the video, the hands-on, all of those, it's so important. Like each one of those guys have a different learning style as well, and it just makes a lot of sense to have a different format for them to learn on. It makes a big difference. So some of the guys, you can be able to handle a sheet of paper and they can take off and go with it. And other guys, you may need to go door to door with them and just train them up that way. Getting them comfortable talking to customers is a huge part of their upsells, and that's part of getting that training in.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I guess the first thing that pops in my mind when after visiting multiple companies, and I think one thing that's really overlooked, in my opinion, is just calibration, machine calibration, machine adjustments. Being familiarized with the equipment that's being run. It can really make or break someone when it comes to from an economical standpoint or a business standpoint. If you're putting down too much product, you're going to be losing money and doing detrimental things to plants and plant material. And if you're not putting down enough, then you're not going to have a happy customer, and you're kind of wasting your time. So I guess that's one that really sticks out, and one that I try to focus on is familiarizing yourself with your equipment.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Brian. So that kind of leads us into another aspect that can support the calibration, and that's a product inventory system. So what I mean by a product inventory system is to actually have a system, and I've used Excel for this in the past, and it works great. You don't need anything more than that. But basically a way of managing your inventory so that you know two things. Did you use the correct amount of product for the production that was done? And how much more days of production do you have available based on the inventory that you have? So it's as simple as doing an inventory check once a week, and then measuring that against what your production numbers are. So I think it's a huge advantage to be able to predict exactly how many days you have based on the round that you're working in currently at that point in time. But it also, even at the changeover of rounds, you can have that Excel sheet tell you how many days of each round that you possibly have left, so that you're not reconfiguring it each time based on what how much square footage you do on an average day. And also tying into that exactly which products are used at what rate for that specific application. It doesn't seem very complicated, but I can tell you that probably less than 5% of the companies that I work with actually have a design system for this. Those that do always have the product that they need. They are never in an emergency situation where they're overpaying for product or overpaying for shipping. And they can always get their production done when they need to get it done. So you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you have to go to your local distributor and take whatever they have on inventory because they may not have what you need, because you're kind of caught off guard with that. And really, in the long run, I think it helps with your buying power. When you feel more comfortable having those predictions as far as what is actually going to be needed, and you can kind of keep measuring that as you go along, you're going to be able to make purchases with a whole lot less effort. And tying it back to Brian's point about the calibration being so important, if you're measuring how much product you've used each week based on the square footage that was completed in production, you can get a macro level look at, did we use the right amount of product? And if you identify that it's off by a little bit, then you can start identifying or zeroing in on different routes, different technicians to make sure that it's actually going to a problem that could be fixed and remedied. So some of the benefits that you see from a product inventory system: you don't slow down production, it prevents over ordering, and it's a check system for all the application rates. And you cannot be lenient on the application rates. I mean, really, Brian gave you that overview of, you could either be spending too much money or not getting the result that you want. If you have 1 week of one technician putting down the incorrect application rate, I mean, you could lose 50% of the customers, and they could do 100 customers in a week. So, just a simple problem like that, you're either, dealing with that headache for days and days and weeks, trying to remedy it, and when you can just kind of nip it in the bud before it even happens. Guys, have you seen, and Chris and Brian, have you seen anyone using a product inventory system that was, I guess, a digital version? Do we have Chris and Brian still?
Yeah, Ultra Green, Caleb, they definitely have a good digital system that they're using. I'm not sure which one they're using, but I know that they're checking on all 3 states right off their computer on product in-house.
Yep, it's a good example. How about you, Brian?
Sorry, guys, I'm trying to figure out this mute button situation. Yeah, I have had customers using that. Generally, I would say a larger portion of my customers do not. Yeah, I highly suggest using it for all the points that you made, Rob.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And I'll tell you, it really is simple to design it on an Excel sheet. All it is a matter of getting the calculations for what your application rates are going to be, and plugging that in, and knowing how much, based off of how much product you have, how far it's going to go. Did you go backwards or forwards? Okay, the next topic is application methods. So both Brian, Chris, and myself have a lot of conversations around application methods. And I want to make sure that I'm really clear on the concept of the webinar as well. You want to make sure that you grab 1 or 2 of these ideas, and it can be an idea within one of these topics, and make sure that those get implemented. So it may be one of the previous topics that we already discussed, but it could be something as simple as in the application methods. So in the application methods, an important factor is that to look at the type of equipment that you're using, because it's not all the same thing. If you're going to be, and I don't necessarily mean the difference in the type of ride-on sprayer spreader that you're using, but are you using a ride-on sprayer spreader, or are you using a pull hose, or are you using a push spreader? Because based on the type of customers that you have, that can dictate what type of equipment you should be using on that route. Also, based on your geography, it can be dictating, can you go all liquid, or should you be using granular and liquid, or predominantly granular? Typically in the some of the colder regions, the beginning and the end of the programs, say it's a 6-step program, the first and last application will be granular, just because it's easier to get them down at that point in time, and you're not worried so much about the soil temperatures, and it's a bit more flexible with your production schedule. But liquid is typically less expensive and can produce a better result, because it's just a more accurate application. So something to keep in mind there. If you can go liquid, you want to go liquid. If you can't, then figure out which applications it's actually going to benefit you the most. And that's that last point. Each application is successful for different reasons. So is your application in the spring going to be successful because of the weed control? Most of the time it is. In the summer, it's because of the type of fertilizer that you're able to use so that you can get a green up when your competitors are struggling. That's just two examples when you think of application methods. So don't go through it yet because there's a couple other points on here. When you are thinking about the size of your properties, look at every route individually. And then if you took a clean slate and you didn't have any equipment, what's the equipment that you would assign to that route? And I'll give you an example. In parts of Philadelphia, you have a huge variance in the suburbs, where you'll have certain areas where the average property size is going to have 20 to 25,000 square feet of turf. And then you'll have other suburbs where you have 5 to 6,000 square feet of turf on average. Well, the style of application is going to vary a lot based on how good of an application you're able to do. So on those smaller ones, it's actually more profitable to use a pull hose than a spray-on spreader, a ride-on sprayer spreader, just because the timeliness of stopping the truck and getting the pull hose started, getting to the back of the yard, you have a lot more tight fits on up against landscaping, behind sheds, along the side of driveway, where you may only have a 3-foot spot where you're trying to do a pass of an application. Well, if you're using a ride-on sprayer spreader, you're going to either be completely over applying or doing an inaccurate application in that spot. So, you know, going back to the way that we used to do lawn care, we insisted that we were going to use ride-on sprayer spreaders because we felt as though we could keep a higher quality of technician if we were giving them all the resources that they needed as far as equipment goes. But what we found out was that it was not a very profitable way to do it, and it really didn't make us differ in the type of technicians that we were able to keep. So look at the route, look at the average size of the property that you have there. I would tell you, in my experience, if it's below that 8,000 square foot range of treatable turf, you should probably be using a pull hose and not a ride-on machine. When it gets larger than that, it definitely pays off because of the employee fatigue, and you want those guys to be able to keep cranking all day long. I want to go into a little bit of the specifics with Chris and Brian. But Brian, you first. When it comes to the ride-on sprayer spreaders, what has been your experience as to which one gets the best result? Brian is probably getting that. We're going to unmute him here. All right, Brian, you're unmuted.
You hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Sweet. And so my experience with the ride-ons, they're great unless guys are rolling them downhill and running them into things. You know, they're awesome, like you said, Rob. The larger properties, you know, pulling hose is definitely, you know, attainable, but it's a lot more efficient and makes your day go a whole lot longer when you're not having to, you know, pull, you know, several, you know, acres of hose per day. So yeah, the you know, the other I guess downfall to the ride-ons, in my opinion, is refilling. You're going to have to take time for that. You're going to have to, you know, you have a much smaller tank. But no, I 100% agree with you, Rob. I mean, anything, you know, under 10K, it should be, you know, being pulled with hose, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's even more than what I said, but I have a lot of people that will use a pull hose on everything that they do, regardless of size, just because of the simplicity of it. And like you said, the ride-on sprayer spreaders add a whole nother dynamic of potential problem that a pull hose system does not. Chris, when you are talking with different companies, do you know what threshold they're kind of looking at? If they are looking at a threshold for where they do the cutoff for whether they're pulling hose or using machines?
Honestly, a lot of them are just completely different thresholds. I've got a customer in north central Arkansas that as long as it fits through the gate, he's using the ride-on, right? So he'll use it on every piece of property he can possibly do. And then I have other people that they're pulling hose on 8,000 and 10,000 square foot properties all day long. So I see a big variance in the choices there.
Yep. That's primarily what I've seen as well. There's a variance. It depends on the company. It depends on what equipment they already have and how they are able to allocate that for the routes. So looking at application methods, some of the benefits, you can have less employee fatigue if you have the equipment fit to the route. Streamlined application process, specifically on those smaller properties, you can really increase your profit margin there, and better results. I mean, when it comes down to the results that you're going to get, there's some key factors in there. The technician, how well they're trained, the equipment that they're using, and the products that they're using. So, if you are just kind of giving everybody the same cookie cutter approach, you're going to have a larger variance in results than if you try to customize the equipment to the route. So the next thing is vehicle inventory. So this doesn't get overlooked quite as much as the product inventory, but vehicle inventory is really simple to do, but has a huge impact. So I would, if you're looking for what's the easiest point to implement out of this webinar, this is probably it. So you want to develop a checklist for each vehicle that you have. Have the technician check it weekly. And this is basically not just for, like, you may have MSDS sheets, you may have a blower on there, a little handheld spreader, a hand can, specific weed controls for specific jobs that are not used in your regular applications. You want to make sure that you have an inventory of all that stuff on each truck. And you want to make sure that you number the equipment with the truck. So even if you have a 1 quart bottle of a specific weed control, have the number written on that, just because if one of your technicians loses it, they're going to get it wherever they can find it. But if it's numbered with the truck, then it helps that technician stay responsible for that inventory. And what we've done in the past that worked pretty well is we would have a one-time forgiveness. And then after that, it would be a pay deduction. And we would sometimes get into the pay deduction, but typically we wouldn't have to, because if one technician had a pay deduction because they lost a blower because it fell off of the truck or something like that, everybody else realized very quickly that they did not want to have that happen. So we even had guys start to secure those things to the truck with a bike lock, so that they could, run a bike lock through 3 different pieces of equipment and have it secured up close to the front of the truck bed, so that it wasn't, you couldn't have some stranger just come and take it, or a technician come and take it because they were the only one that knew the code for it. So it really, that's not just, if you have your technicians pay attention to the inventory and treat it like it's their own, then you're not going to be in a situation where you feel like you're the only one that is treating it like your own. That goes for if you're a production manager, if you're the owner of the business, you could be any position that's overseeing all that inventory. you know that stuff walks. So a couple of those things go a long way. And we also had them on their vehicle inventory report at the end of the week. They would go through and check off that they had everything, initial it, and hand that into the production manager. So if they found out later on that something was missing, they could either find out how long it's been missing, or whether or not the technician was doing an accurate job with the inventory in their vehicle. Brian and Chris, I apologize because you were getting a ton of feedback when you talk, so I'm just going to ask Brian on this one. Brian, you have experience in even managing your own inventory in a vehicle, because Brian has experience as a technician as well. Anything that you can think of that helped you out along the way, that as far as protecting the inventory that you had?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was overseeing like 2 or 3 guys in Delaware, and numbering the equipment was the number one thing. I was kind of a working manager at that point. But numbering the equipment and weekly checks, making sure that everyone is accountable for what left the shop that day in the morning, and making sure that it returned, or I should say maybe what left on Monday is coming back on Friday.
Yeah.
And I was usually kind of a micromanager, because I didn't want to have to deal with issues. So I would just peek in the trucks every day at the end of the day.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Brian. So some of the benefits for the vehicle inventory, it's pretty simple. You can avoid unexpected loss of production, because you don't want to, the drive time in production is the ultimate profit killer. So you don't want to have to go back out to a property that you were already at because you didn't have the proper equipment to take care of it. Or say there was a pool area that needed to be done that was fenced in that you couldn't get the other equipment into. It's just going to add a lot of predictability to the production schedule and avoiding unnecessary drive time. The other thing is, if you have the Department of Ag or pesticide regulations stop you, you want to make sure that the guys have everything that they need and that stop goes smoothly, not because of avoiding a fine, but just the amount of time that is can be occupied by that. I myself have experienced a 1 hour stop and a 5 minute stop. And that was not based on the person who was stopping me. That was based on how well I was prepared as a technician. So I think that when you look at the overall production schedule, the more things you can pay attention to and be prepared for, like the quote said in the beginning, the more opportunity you're going to have for growing your business. So the last of the 5 points is the maintenance schedule. So every piece of equipment that you have should have a maintenance schedule. And that doesn't matter if it's trucks, trailers, the blowers, whatever it is. And we used a really simple system in the past, and I've seen other people do this. And everyone that I've asked about it, when I walk into a warehouse and I see that they have a maintenance board up on the wall, I always ask them, like, hey, does that help you? Do you think that makes a difference? Just kind of playing devil's advocate. And all of them say, well, we used to not have it and we would have stuff break down all the time. So to avoid that, you have to be proactive with your maintenance schedule on all your equipment. And it's as simple as having all the equipment listed, and based on the number that corresponds with the truck, and that route, and have the date of the last maintenance, and have the date of the next maintenance that's due. And then having laminated maintenance checklists for each date that's recorded. So it's not just, hey, we need to do an oil change, because an oil change is simple. But what if it is like you got to do a recalibration on your equipment at a certain time? Like once a week, you have to do a calibration check. Well, what actually goes into a calibration check? Because you don't want all your technicians doing their own variants of a calibration check. So you have it documented so everybody's doing the same exact thing on the same schedule. That adds a lot of predictability into your production schedule and just avoids headaches because, we said the windshield time is the killer. Well, windshield time when they're not even moving in a vehicle is a real killer, especially when the production manager has to go out there and rescue them, and it becomes a whole ordeal for an entire day. So I would say make sure to focus on that maintenance schedule. It's another easy one to implement. Most people do have some type of maintenance schedule, but I always think it's good to have it posted in the warehouse so that it's visible for everyone, so that they know what's coming up. You as a production manager or business owner know what's coming up, and you can be prepared for that. It also helps that when you have rainouts or something like that, you know exactly what everybody should be doing, getting as much stuff checked off of that maintenance schedule as you possibly can to make sure that you're adding to the productivity of the good weather days. So some of the benefits for the maintenance schedule: longevity of equipment. I didn't even mention that. The equipment, the vehicles, they're all going to last longer if they're maintained on a proper schedule. Predictable application speeds, going back to the importance that we discussed in that, and avoiding unexpected loss of production. The longevity of equipment can really make a big difference for the entire company. If you need, say that you have 5 routes and your equipment can last 2 years longer than if you weren't doing a predictable maintenance schedule. Well, that's 5 pieces of equipment you don't have to buy. And if it's a ride-on sprayer spreader, it could be $10,000 each time. It's $50,000 that you don't have to spend for another 2 years. That's a big difference just because of paying attention to a maintenance schedule. So, in conclusion, some of the points that were and benefits that we're really trying to drive home is that if you're able to pay attention to some of the details and preparation that goes into production, you're going to be able to retain your employees longer, build better profits, add some consistency to a production schedule that you're fighting weather on all the time that is inconsistent, help manage cash flow of the business, and help to grow your business because you're going to be more profitable, and a profitable business is always easier to grow. So with all that being said, I want to thank Brian and Chris for the contributions. And remember that we have some other resources that you can take advantage of. When you're thinking about the training for your technicians, the Golden Street approach is a really great way for them to understand the impact that they can have. So looking at that link, calibrating spray equipment, another great one that if you're a little bit unfamiliar or you need a refresher, using that link is great. And then all the Holganix marketing support that Katie provides, and she's constantly adding to this. But when you're trying to grow your business and we want to help with that any way we can, we always make sure that we have that marketing support available to you.
And this will be sent out with links after the webinar.
All right, great. Do we have any questions?
Well, before we get to that, I just want to remind everybody that next week we actually have another webinar. And this one's specifically on the fertilizer program.
Yep.
And if you missed last week's, it was actually quite a big hit. Don't mean to toot our own horn there. We got some good feedback from people. I'll forward out the recording just so that people have it. It was on increasing sales at your lawn and landscape company. Cool. Well, I think that's all of our questions and comments.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for being on here. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Brian, or Chris. We're happy to help, and hopefully we can lend a hand.